Thank you so much, Dr. Chui. Thank you all for being here today. We're really, really happy to have you here for our 6th annual MACRMI Forum. We're going to get started today with a little bit of background quickly about MACRMI and what CARE is before we get into our main event of the day, which is a simulation on the basically behind the scenes of how a CARE case would work. So these are the objectives for your CMEs, and we have no disclosures today. You will be able to receive your CME credit by filling out an evaluation that will be emailed to you, and there's some details there in your packet about that. So without further ado, MACRMI. Who is MACRMI? This is everyone that is part of the Massachusetts Alliance for Communication and Resolution Following Medical Injury. And if you've been with us before, you'll see that we have a couple new members more recently. One is Partners Healthcare, and they include Brigham and Women's Hospital and Newton Wellesley Hospital right now that are actively doing the communication and resolution implementation. They will have more facilities coming after that, so that's very exciting for us this year. And as always, our insurers, our patient partners, the other institutions that had run the pilots, which are Bay State Health and Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, Milton and Needham, the Massachusetts Hospital Association, the Mass Coalition for Prevention of Medical Errors, and of course the Massachusetts Medical Society and the Mass Bar Association, as well as MITS and the Board of Registration in Medicine. So thank you all so much for all your contributions to this alliance. So I want to talk just quickly about what MACRMI is and what we have for you. So that alliance meets quarterly, and what we do is it's our mission to try to help communication, apology, and resolution programs develop and thrive in Massachusetts. So we have everything available to you, is from presentations to different resources that you can use in your own facilities to try to make this happen, as well as resources for patients and attorneys and anyone else in the process who wants to know, how can I become a part of this? And so some of our featured resources on our website are some best practices for institutions, attorneys, and this year our newest best practice is for insurers. We realized that was a gap that we had, so the group came up with some new best practices for them. And every time we create a new resource, the representatives from each of those stakeholders gets together, we look through what we think would be good practices, we vet them, we revise them, and when we put out a resource, it means that it has been approved by all of those different groups. So you can know that this is something that all of these different stakeholders has bought into when you use it. And as I have said before, they're all free on our website, and we want you to beg, borrow, and steal them. That's the whole point of having them. So we also have patient brochures and information sheets. There are a few in the back at the registration table if you want to take a look at those, and again, also on our website. We have a site readiness checklist. If you're thinking about doing this and you want to know, is this something that I can get started with now? What do I need in place? That checklist is there online, available for you. Sample policies and procedures you can put into your institution that are already there that you can fill in so you don't have to reinvent the wheel, as well as our algorithms. FAQs for patients, providers, and attorneys. Slide decks that you can use so that you do not have to create those yourself for teaching concepts to clinicians and administrators and others. We also have a full implementation guide that links to all of the different resources in our entire library that we think would be useful for implementation. And if you want to implement this program and you want us to come and help you do that, we will use this implementation guide with you so that you have everything there in one big guide with a timeline and all of the things that we can do for you. And we are happy to do that. And there also are articles online, of course, with supportive data, and our own articles, which came out this year, 2 of them, and 2 should be coming out later, which Alan Kachalia and Michelle Mello will discuss. But those are also free on our website and not free from the journal, so we've paid so that you can have full and free access to those, so please take advantage of that as well. And this is our website. We just wanted to show you quickly, if you haven't been there, that we have a newly redesigned resource library. We did get some feedback that it might be a little bit challenging to find the resources, so we redesigned this so that there is on the top a big search bar that you can search whatever phrase you're looking for, and also different categories of things that you might want. So these are sort of hot buttons that work for that. We also have redesigned it so that we have a mobile site available now. So when you scroll through this on your phone, it will be formatted to whatever kind of phone that you have. So if you need a resource on the go, if you're looking, to talk to somebody about MACRMI, or maybe you're even looking for advice on disclosure, or any of the things that we have on our website, you can easily do that on your phone now. Hello. Hold on one second.
You have the resource
Okay, there we go. Now it's right. Too many things. Okay. All right, so let's get to the right page here. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to do is have a poll, a live poll. Now, I know that this might seem technically challenging, but we're going to do a practice first. So what we want you to do is to get out your phone right now, and we're going to do this poll by text message. So the practice question is, what is my favorite type of music? So open up a new text message, and in the to line, you're going to send it to 37607. So this will open up a blank message to this number. And down on the bottom, you'll see little codes for each one. So if your favorite type of music is, oh, good job, whoever just said that, pop, for example, you will send 469146 to that number, and then it will automatically populate. So take a second right now and vote for your favorite type of music. Good, see, this is not so technically challenging. Oh, classical, not very popular in this room. That's my favorite, so. Nice. Oh, pop is edging out. Great. Oh. All right. Rock and roll. I would not have guessed that, but that's awesome. Okay, great. So do we see how it works? So we're going to have 3 polls today, and the first one we're going to do now, and then Alan's going to do a couple later. So this is the first one, and it works just like what we just did. So you can even use that same message that's already open to 36707. Sorry, don't type it to that. 37607. And this is the question. Has your institution adopted a rigorous care program? Rank it on a scale of 1 to 5. 1 is we have not attempted to start one, all the way to 5, we have a fully operational program. And I'll give you a second to answer that. Anyone else have any answers before we skip? Okay, so this will be good information, and we're going to come back to this later, but we want to take our time today to talk and show you more about what a real rigorous care program looks like, and we'll see if your answers change to this question later. So what is communication, apology, and resolution? What are we really going to see and talk about today? And these are the principles that we focus on. So it's communicate with patients and families when unanticipated adverse outcomes occur. And provide for their immediate needs. So this means any unanticipated outcome. This doesn't just mean when you know that something went wrong that could have been preventable. This means when there was an expected complication or something that the patient did not expect. And you will see in our results and what we talk about later that a lot of your cases will fall into this category. It will fall into something where you couldn't have prevented that outcome, but that patient is still hurting and still has a lot of questions. And we do a lot of work in that area. So that's one of the main principles. The second, of course, is to really investigate and then explain what happened to the patient so that they can get their questions answered and so that they have that space to answer questions about the adverse event that happened to them. The third is to implement systems to avoid recurrences and improve in patient safety. This is really, really a central tenet of the communication, apology, and resolution program. The end goal of this is to improve the safety so that this does not happen to another patient again, and so that the whole system becomes a safer and more transparent system. And then 4, where appropriate, of course, apologize and work towards resolution, including an offer of fair compensation without that patient having to file a lawsuit. Okay, so this is how we determine what kind of case a care insurer case is and what kind of case falls into that other bucket of not preventable but still needs communication. So internally in our hospitals, if an internal investigation team determines that the standard of care was not met or we're unsure if it was met and that unmet standard of care caused significant harm, then that moves to what we call the care insurer case protocol. But what that really means is that we send this case to our insurer because we think it is worthy of another review, possibly compensation, and it needs a serious outside look. That case today, that type of case, is what our simulation case is going to be. It's a case where we know that we did not meet the standard of care, And we know that the patient was significantly harmed, and so the insurer is now involved in that case. And so we're going to see that play out today. But I just wanted you to understand that that is the type of case we're looking at. But there are lots and lots of other cases in where those criteria are not met, and that's what we call non-protocol cases. And they're equally as important to communicate with the patient, to make sure they understand what happened. And there's also an option for what we as MACRMI now call care support, which we had formerly called service recovery, but actually realized that that was not really an appropriate term for this, that this is really more of a support for the patient that's outside of settlement, but something that would be a small gesture that would help them through this time. So whether it's parking stickers or a waiver of a copay or a gift certificate or something small like that, that you can show that you're supporting them outside of whatever qualifications in terms of preventable or significant harm or not. So those are the big body of other cases, and Alan will show you later that only 16% of the cases that we looked at in the care program are those big insurer bucket cases. The rest of them are all this kind of smaller work that's equally as important. So without further ado, we're going to get going with the simulation. I'm going to read this case out loud. Now you have in your packet a guide to the simulation, so you can see sort of each of the, and it's after the description of what MACRMI is. I think it's the 4th page. So you can see what the scene is, who's in the scene, what's going to happen in that scene, what we're focusing on. But I'm also just going to read the case scenario for you because I think it's easier to absorb in 2 ways. And then we're going to have them come up and do the presentation. And in between some of the scenes, we will have a panel that's going to come up and discuss what you've seen, and you'll have an opportunity to ask questions to the panelists and also to the actors if you want as well. So here's our case. Mrs. Chekhov, a 31-year-old woman with limited English proficiency, presents to labor and delivery in active labor on a Saturday. She was scheduled to have a C-section the following Monday due to her baby presenting in the breech position. She is accompanied by her cousin, who also has limited English proficiency but speaks better English than Mrs. Chekhov. While the original plan was to have a C-section, the covering obstetrician, using the cousin as an interpreter, discusses the possibility of trying to deliver vaginally. The labor proceeds vaginally, but difficulty arises at the time of the delivery of the head, and the baby is born with very low APGARs, or scores used by doctors to assess the health of the newborn, having suffered a brain injury due to lack of oxygen. The baby subsequently dies overnight in the NICU. The QI director for OB calls patient safety in the morning to talk to them about the case. A debrief will be held on labor and delivery with the team later that day.
Hello, this is Stacy.
Hey Stacy, it's Tony. I need to tell you about a case that happened.
Okay, I'm listening.
We just had this really bad event on labor and delivery. There's a patient who came in and she was breached. She was supposed to have a C-section. She was scheduled for it actually, but she ended up coming in labor. She had a vaginal delivery, and the baby died. And so we're looking back at it, but I think we're going to have a problem here. You know, I think this was preventable.
Oh, Tony, I'm so sorry. How is the family?
They're upset. We're doing our best, but of course they're upset.
How are the clinicians doing? Are the peer supporters aware of the event?
Yeah, the peer supporters are in the loop. We've had some of the senior clinicians go to talk to the physicians individually as well.
Okay, well, let's get someone from patient relations to talk with the social worker up there, who I assume is already on the scene. Heidi's at her desk now. I'll go over and talk to her. Where is the patient?
She's still in labor and delivery, but we're going to get her a room on the antepartum floor so she doesn't have to be around any other babies.
Okay, thank you. Heidi can see if there's anything we can do to help support the patient right now. Is her OB on service right now?
She's not on service. We debriefed briefly after the case, and she's going to come in again today to debrief.
Okay. Has anyone talked to the patient or her family about what happened? I can imagine they might have a lot of questions, so we should try to speak with them as soon as possible.
Yeah, the clinicians have spoken to her, given her as much information as we can, and we're going to continue to do that. And we'll check in with her to see when she's up for more of a conversation.
Okay, great. I'll check in with you later today to see what you found out so we can plan the next steps. It would be good for us to talk through the conversation with the family. I'm happy to have a call with you and the MD so that we can all be on the same page about what we know. I'm just so sorry for everyone.
Me too, Stacy. Thanks.
Hi, Stacy.
Hi, Pat.
Thanks for letting me know right away about Mrs. Chaikoff. I feel so terrible for that poor family. You met with Tony. What did Tony say?
She said that Mrs. Chaikoff's case was preventable, in her opinion, although they haven't done the full investigation yet, so they don't know all the details of why exactly she ended up giving birth vaginally. The patient's first language is not English, and there may have been a miscommunication in the record about the breech position, but that's unclear at this point.
That's so sad. I feel so badly for everyone involved. All right, let's think about what we need to do right away. Did you notify billing to hold all the bills? Because the worst thing possible right now would be for the family to get a bill quickly from the medical center.
Yes, I called billing, and we have a hold on all the hospital and physician bills. I also called CRICO just to let them know about the case. I told them it was likely preventable, but that we have to do more of an investigation to figure out, exactly what went wrong, but that it would likely be a care insurer case.
Okay, that's great. And has someone from patient relations, was Heidi going to go see the patient?
Yes, she went up yesterday after the call from Tony. Heidi said that they were very upset, and through the interpreter learned that they would like to know what happened and would like us to keep in close contact. Last night they met with their primary OB, who explained that what we know so far, which is that she should not have given birth vaginally, but instead as planned by C-section, and that this was our fault, not hers. And of course we gave an apology. She promised the family that we would keep in touch as we had a better understanding of what happened. Heidi promised to keep checking in, and the OB social work team is already working with the family for bereavement.
All right, so we want to make sure that this review happens as quickly as possible. The family can't wait for answers about what happened. Can OB expedite a review of this case so that we can bring it to our next directors meeting?
Yes, that's in 3 weeks.
3 weeks. All right, we'll need to get the review and results of that review before then so we can begin to communicate with the family. Then we can present at QI directors, and if there's any new findings that come out, we can circle back with the family and give them updates, but it sounds like it's a pretty clear-cut case of a preventable error.
Yes, I'll put the reviews in RL as urgent, and I'll request that we schedule the presentation at the next L&D M&M, which is on Monday.
Okay, so as soon as we get the majority of those reviews back, let's set up a conference call with CRICO, so we can discuss what's the strategy going forward about who's going to be the right person to be communicating with the family. I assume that the OB will be part of that, and others involved, as well as who's most familiar with her here at the medical center. And let's make sure we have this marked on the care case list so we keep track of all the touches of communication so we don't fall behind on that.
Sure, Pat.
Thanks a lot, Stacy. Let me know if you need anything else.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. So now, after what you've seen, we're going to have a panel discussion with 4 panelists and some questions from the audience. So if our panelists want to come up here, Rick, you come on up, and Sue and Terry. So we have 4 panelists today. Rick Boothman is going to be the moderator and also part of the panel. He is the Chief Risk Officer at the University of Michigan Medical Center. And then we have Sue Nevins, who is a patient advocate and also a nurse at the North Shore Medical Center. We have Pat Focarelli, who's the VP of Patient Safety at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, and Terry Ott, who's a claims manager at Bay State Health. So one from each health system and the original pilots, and then Rick is going to take it away. Thanks.
Thank you, Melinda. think the best place to start is with intentions. What is it that we are interested in? Excuse me before I fall over. What is it that we're interested in the acute moment? It's always tragic, often very complex. What are we most interested in? What are you thinking about, Pat, at that, what do you want for the system at that moment?
So I think the thing that I'm thinking when I hear about something like this is that the first part of what happens immediately is extremely important. Partly because, well, there's a few things. One is that these conversations with the family should be carefully done so that we're not adding additional burden to the patient and family, and that we're not seeming as if we're holding back questions for the patients and families. I think with my safety hat on, the other thing I'm thinking about is, do we need to do anything immediately to mitigate risk for other patients in the area, which we did not really talk about yet. And I think the third thing is thinking about the staff that were involved and making sure that, I'd want to know the obstetrician who delivered this baby, were they delivering other babies that day? And those are the things about the safety. But immediately, I think I want to make sure that we have support for the clinicians, mitigation of risk for future patients, but also carefully coordinated communication with the patient and family for the purposes of not burdening the patient and family with worry that we're holding things back on them.
So those three things are really important, and you're juggling all three, but the circumstances matter. I mean, if this case comes to you 6 months after the baby's death, there may be less sense of urgency.
That's right.
Suzanne, what do you think is, from the patient's perspective, what's the drive? I mean, describe a little bit about the kind of sense of urgency there.
Well, I think as a patient, one of the things is obviously there's that shock value, that feeling of what happened. This woman has lost her baby. This was not obviously in her plan, had no idea probably things like this happen. And I think one of the most needed things is to be very approachable from the beginning, because with this mother also comes extraneous family. And sometimes the patient herself may still be in shock and saying, I don't even know what happened, or I'm trying to think. And everybody's coming in from the outside saying, this happened, this went wrong, my friend had this happen. So I think if someone establishes right away a connection to that patient, like I am your person, not from Grey's Anatomy, but it is, that I will be your person, and this is my card, and I care. I think 2 words matter. I'm sorry you're going through this, and we care. Because in a big institution, you might feel like I'm just a number. They're not going to hear, and this baby, also language. My big thing, and I'm sure you all struggle in a hospital, it's a weekend and interpreters have been cut. How do you have these conversations with interpreter phones? So I think in moments like this, when a language is an issue, somebody professional needs to come in and advocate, because culture plays a big role in how the process may be perceived.
So you see the marked difference between the old way of handling things and deny and defend. How many lawyers here in this room, I did it, said to caregivers, oh, for God's sakes, don't say the wrong thing. Don't talk to that patient. This is a remarkable change from those old days where we don't wait for claims. We instead get right on board, and those three things, take care of the patient, take care of the caregiver, and make sure that nobody else gets hurt, are what drives us initially in the short run. But Terry, talk a little bit about what are the challenges, because the safe way is to say, let's just isolate everybody and sit back and see what happens. What are the practical challenges in the trenches once you fly into the breach like this, so to speak? Bad pun.
One of the challenges is that we as caregivers want to give answers as soon as possible, and sometimes we want to fill in the blanks even if we don't have all the information that we should have, but we assume we speculate, and we believe that, you know, there are certain answers that we can give patients that we may not be correct. We may not have all the information. So the one big challenge is to tell the patients, so as Pat said, not to burden them, but to give them the appropriate information and only tell the patients what it is that you know and not what you believe is correct until you do find out that it is indeed correct. The other thing is to give the patient time to assimilate the information that you've given them, because, you know, as we said, this is a challenging time in the OB setting. You've got hormones that are going up and down, whether it's the moms or whether it's the families or friends who are there. There's anger, there's sorrow, you know, there's all kinds of issues that can come up. And from the claims point of view, this is where you have to put everything together and realize that there's a time for everything, and you have to give people time to be able to sort of fit the puzzle pieces together and be able to go on. For me, as a claims person, I have to think forward as to where is that patient, what are they prepared to hear, and, you know, I need to think forward as to how am I going to resolve this case, what is the best for the family now, and what's the best thing that I can do for them going forward.
So some occupational hazards. One, you can't unring the bell, right? When you sit down and you blather what you think happened, it's really hard to backtrack, because credibility and trust means so much in this case, in this space. The second is also true. Almost nothing turns out to be the way it appeared when it comes through my door. So I have to have discipline, and all of our staff has to have great discipline and be in complete control over what comes out of your mouth and how it comes out. I had some doctor use the term pulmonary toilet, not understanding how offensive that can be to patients. I've had physicians say things like, oh, you just have bad DNA, bad protoplasm. This person was trying to die. We have all sorts of expressions which in the patient's space are really offensive. And we, as that bridge between the family and the grieving patient and our medical staff, that's what we're doing. We're bridging that. And we have to be disciplined. This is not Pollyanna at all. This is very important. How do you see this situation as it unfolded? Were there any cringes that you had here?
For me, the first cringe that I had, even when I read this and when I heard about it, was the interpreter service. It's not always wise to use a family member, because we are in the medical field, and, you know, Rick, as you said, there's certain terminology that just doesn't always translate well, whether it's language or culture. So that's the first place that I cringed. I kept on saying, "Where's the interpreter? Where's the interpreter?"
And I'm sorry, I meant in the passage of the facts, though, were there any things that you think might have been done better, even as we have reached only this stage?
Actually, I thought that it went very, very well, because I thought there was open communication. And, you know, the first thing that I heard is, "I'm so sorry," from the risk manager. You know, "How are you? How is everybody feeling?" And I think, you know, that connection, that emotion was something that was nice to see. You know, it was nice to see.
Suzanne, what do you
liked
think?
it.
The only time I cringed a little is when they were talking to her and they said, "We know that something went wrong, or, you know, that it could be our fault." And I thought, wow, that's really almost too soon, because personally, at that stage, you don't even know if anything went wrong, but you want to know that someone cared. And that, so I don't think too many patients, I may be wrong, but want an immediate, "this is what we know." That comes. But I think initially is, we know something went on, this was unexpected, whatever, and we care, we're going to help you through this process right now. And we'll continue to look back on what may have or may not have gone wrong, because again, for this delivery, you can kind of say, "Oh, yeah, but so many, as Melinda brought up, that fine line it may not be an overt error, it could be something else. And now you've committed that we know we did something wrong. So if there's family in the room, believe me, they're catching it.
Pat?
And they'll go more on the wrong than,
What's your reaction to Suzanne's?
Oh, I think
Point.
it's a good point. And I think it's exactly what you said earlier, is that the criticality of thinking about what these early conversations are can't be overstated. And I think so this is a case which would be an very infrequent occurrence of a very severe event. And what you would hope is that there would be almost the same level of response for events that are less severe. And thinking, how do you evolve a system so that all of those conversations that are happening are exquisitely thought through before they happen? Because there's a lot of them that happen. You know, this simulated case is high degree of harm, low frequency event. And OB events are generally called out right away more than others. So I'm thinking about all the conversations that happen that aren't as exquisitely planned. And to somebody's, or I think you said you can't unring the bell, and how you have to think about how you build systems where there's an easy notification and easy access to coaching for conversations.
So I'm glad you brought the word coaching up. The business of training your staff came into play. When I first read this, I went, oh, geez, I really cringed over that because I kept waiting for more facts. I thought maybe we would find out that even though a C-section really was planned, the baby's feet were already out and there was no pushing back. But that didn't happen. But I thought that was awfully premature. Now, how do you deal with the pressure that you get from family that wants questions answered and from sometimes angry people demanding things? We've adopted and train our staff, first of all, in terms of our medical staff, we don't train at Michigan in disclosure techniques. I think that it's almost irresponsible to say we can teach you how to be compassionate and everything else, and then 3 years later when it happens to you and you're at the center of it, you're going to remember all that training. What we really want our medical staff and our clinical staff in general is to be the best clinicians they can be, and just don't offer things that they don't know to be true. So our guidance to our doctors and our coaching to our doctors and our nursing staff is really pretty basic. A, always support the patient and always show empathy, never not show empathy. Stay with them no matter how angry it might be. But B, promise a full disclosure along the lines of, we will get to the bottom of this, but right now we want to take care of your urgent medical needs. We're not running away, we are embracing you, but it would be disrespectful. It would be disrespectful to you and possibly harmful to even guess right now about what happened. Let's deal with what's most important today, and then we will get back to you. It also offers a nice segue at some point for the caregiver to say, Ms. So-and-so or Mr. So-and-so from risk management is going to come down and meet with you soon, and we'll manage those information expectations. But that's all we really want of our healthcare staff, and then we want them to call for help. And let us help them across the board. Help them with their documentation, help them with next steps, help them with cutting through the red tape so that if they need new levels of care, patients get what they need, and they definitely don't feel abandoned. So how do you unring that bell once you have this caregiver saying, this never should have happened, and you never should have had a vaginal delivery, and we made a big mistake? Going forward, what's going to happen, do you think, with that admission? Terry, you're in the trenches.
The one thing that, even before that, I think the patients want to know that it wasn't their fault, especially a mother.
Yeah.
It's, you know, when you're a new mom, you know, as I said, with the hormone surging, you think of all kinds of things, and your imagination can take flight, and you can think, oh my God, did I do something to cause this? So before we even address we think that, you know, that something happened and it's our fault, we want to make sure that the parents know that it wasn't theirs, that it's not something that they did, because they're never gonna get over that if they leave the hospital believing that there's something that they did wrong.
Suzanne, do you want to speak to that? Because that factors into almost every one of our situations.
Oh, first of all, no matter what may occur to that patient, it's 100%. So when we're doing different levels of events, we may say, oh, well, this is only this and this is this. But to the patient, it's definitely 100%. I think the hardest part is patients I remember thinking, did I move during my surgery, which was insane. I was under general anesthesia, but I took the blame. I also had no conversation. And to tell you the truth, the emotional of leaving the place, not really knowing anything, wondering what happened. I mean, the scenario could go on and on. That healing from the emotional trauma can take longer than the physical answers. So I can't stress enough how much I had a housekeeper who sat on my bed and patted my bed. And that was what to me was the connection of, she knows something's wrong. She, couldn't really talk to me, but it wasn't that we're gonna just keep going like nothing happened. And how much I treasure a program like this now. Whether you're in the program or not yet, just remember you need a conversation. It doesn't have to be a litany. If someone could have looked at me that day and said, oh my God, Sue, I care. We're gonna help you, we're gonna figure this out. And that is basic to what we do. And in my day 11 years ago, it was scatter. I think I just want to stress that mother, I'm an OB nurse, so this case brings it right to my heart. They're going to go home to a baby room. They're going home to milk pouring out of their bodies. They're going home to all these things that we have no concept of unless we've been touched by it. So I want to make sure people are aware too that there's always someone. I do a lot with the losses of the moms. I'm their person for that. So if you know a nurse or you know someone in your med-surg areas that's really good at taking care of patients like that, try to get her in there. Whether she's the nurse on the case or just a coworker, find your people who can do the work.
So how do these dynamics change if this occurs in an outpatient setting?
So in an outpatient setting, I mean, theoretically, it should be a similar kind of response. So outpatient settings within our medical center have the same ability to call for assistance. To your point, we've tried to implement a single point of contact so that people don't have to all know how to do a communication apology, but they can call. I think that for outpatient settings, if there needs to be an immediate conversation, you can still get help immediately. But also the tenets of good communication and then promising patients you'll follow up at subsequent visits are the key thing. Terry,
have you seen, in the trenches, have you seen different challenges with outpatient cases?
I have. It depends on, each challenge is different and it depends on the case. But I think one thing that is consistent, whether they're inpatient or outpatient, is communication. Making sure that the patient receives consistent communication. You don't want to be hearing different messages from different people, whether you're inpatient or outpatient. And sometimes in the outpatient setting, you can feel that you're more removed, that you get lost, that perhaps you're not seeing the same providers all the time, or somebody told you one thing at one point and you heard something different at another time. So from a claims point of view, you're trying to ascertain as to what it is that the patient has been told and what it is that they've maintained of what they've been told, because they do forget sometimes that everybody's on the same page as you're communicating regarding an event.
So I have one more question, but to let the audience know, we'll take a couple of questions from the audience in a second, but here's my question.
Oh, sure.
Thanks, Paula. So the one thing that you're all seeing is a maturing system. How did you get everybody in your outpatient areas, your inpatient areas, to know first about the system, about the approach, about the whole shift in mentality, and then what to do when something bad happens in their area. What have you done communication-wise within the system before these events occur?
So if this is a constant requirement for nurturing what you do initially, right? So the initial amount, the number of educational forums that happened within the medical center and across the medical staff were hundreds. So that's 3 or 4 years ago. So then you think with a constant flux of staff, how do you reintroduce people? So we have new house staff that come every year, and so they have their GME orientation. There's 2 or 3 days of that where we're part of that orientation for new house staff. We have a lot of information just on our intranet portal and through the medical staff policies and the hospital policies about communication and apology. But mostly we know that we have a team of patient safety staff who are very well known within the organization and aligned with the clinical service lines. So people know who they are. They're all here, very visible in the organization. And we have a pager that we have called 3Help. That's 24/7, 365 days a year. If you need help related to this kind of an event, that you can get help. And that's right on our homepage. On our homepage of our portal, we always have the number of days since somebody's had a last harm event, and if you click in there, there's a lot of information for. But I would say that this is making sure that everyone knows is extremely challenging, and it just requires a constant reminder. I think one of the other things I think that we did early on, well, 2 things. One is in our event reporting tool, maybe about 5 years ago, we inserted a required question that you can't finish reporting, so we get about 8,000 to 9,000 events a year. You can't complete a report without saying, what does a patient and family understand about this event? And you can say that they've been told or they haven't been told or you don't know, but it makes people pause. And then the second is that for all of our mortality and morbidity rounds and all of our root cause analysis, we added in information that's required to close the loop about what does a patient and family understand about this event, what have they been told, and just raising that question every mortality and morbidity rounds, raising that question. It's very important because it's a movement really, and just a lot of consciousness raising.
At Bay State, we've had similar educational processes, and also our cases, when we set them up, we designate the care cases that we focus on the process, and we make sure that the loop is closed. But also, interestingly enough, we've not only done internal teaching, but also external teaching to plaintiffs' counsel, to know that we are there, that care is going, it is part of our culture, and it is who we are.
Any questions from the audience? Yes.
Thank you very much. My name is Ihor Bilik. I'm neonatologist. The question that I had, what Rick actually was your question, which was not answered, and that is, what do you do when the physician or clinician says, oh, it is all my fault, I'm really sorry, and so on, and that question was not answered, because then it was answered by saying, well, you have to remember about the mother, what she's going through, which is okay, but I'd like to know the answer to that question. Thank you.
You want to take it, and then I'll go.
Yes, I can actually answer that question. When the case comes to me as a claims person, and I've been told that the physician has basically apologized and said it's my fault, I'll speak to the patient and ascertain exactly as to what they heard, what happened. I asked them what happened to them, what they believe happened, what they've been told, what they know, what the physician has said to them. And then I try to speak with the physician and get back to them to see what it is, what was meant. Because it's, for us to say I'm sorry in a situation that is as devastating as this is an appropriate response. And for somebody to say it's my fault, in my mind I think to myself, would define what my fault means. Is it my hand that caused that? Is it my judgment that caused that? Or is it my fault that I was just there and I couldn't avoid it from happening? So I need more information from everybody, and I offer that to the patient, and I try to explain to them as best I can from the physician's point of view. If they didn't get what they needed in the meetings that happened subsequently, if they didn't get it from the physician, I try to get more information from the physician And I try to speak with everybody and try to communicate and connect the dots, anything that's missing and isn't connected. And I use that information going forward towards the resolution, whatever that may be.
I would just going to add that most of these conversations are not claims rep conversations. So most of these conversations are part of the normal day-to-day business of the hospital, where physicians will say it was my fault, or they'll say it was someone else's fault, which is very difficult and extremely common. And so it's the ongoing conversation with the patient and family that's either orchestrated through patient relations or patient safety, or coached with the providers who are taking care of the patient at the present time.
So the answer from a lot of experience, unfortunately, is that it really depends. There are times, I had a cardiac surgeon in my office at 6 o'clock in the morning. At 2 o'clock that morning, he had what could only be described as a tantrum. Would tell anybody on the floor, what were those idiots in the emergency room thinking? Why wasn't I advised of your admission at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, not at 2 in the morning? It went on and on and on. And when I confronted him and said to him at 6 in the morning, here's what the idiots were thinking, this is why they thought it was a cardiology and not a cardiac surgery problem, he said, oh, I get that. And I said, fine, you go back and unring the bell, because you left no doubt about how you felt. I paid on that case largely because of his intemperate response. Most cases, you can back off. You can, especially if you get to it early. I mean, the key to me is to find out very quickly what people know, what they should know, what's been told to them, was empathy shown. It's not just the admission that I'm worried about, it's were they treated properly and all of those things. So the sooner we can get involved, the better. But we've done a very hard job and a very thorough job of getting on every faculty meeting we can get on constantly, and just reinforcing that simple message about what we want and what we don't want. But it can have claims significance, and sometimes you can't unring it. Yes?
First of all, I'd like to acknowledge that the decision to move the patient to an antepartum floor immediately was very important, I think, and very wise and sensitive. But in the climate of length of stay concerns and the nearly drive-through delivery climate, it's particularly good that the patient was kept in the hospital, probably beyond what they needed medically, what she needed medically, in order to have access to her and to maximize the value of the whole endeavor. Mm-hmm. But how does that work with outpatient cases? Do patients get admitted if there's a misadventure or a bad outcome? Are there allowances made for that?
I think patients would be admitted if they needed to be admitted for medical care. I can't think honestly of a case where a patient was admitted to a bed without needing medical care because of this kind of communication. And I think that but for your comments about the mother who delivered the baby, some of this we would take the lead for patients like this from the patient as well. Are they comfortable still being in the hospital? Do they want to switch to another hospital? Is there something we can do to expedite their discharge? So sometimes it's comforting to stay and sometimes not so comforting. So I think taking the lead from the patient when they're medically cleared is important.
Remember I'm glad you asked that question. There's no formula.
No.
Everything we do is to reinforce the medical mission and reinforce the duty to that patient. And it's without regard to these length of stay concerns. It's without regard to all of these other things. It's not Pollyanna, but it is, let's do what's best for the patient at that moment, and we'll sort out the pieces later. By continuing to reinforce that, that's really what this whole model is about. Yes? There's a microphone right behind you.
Thank you. I'm a physician. I was struck by one of the comments Tony made that has the physicians received a peer support. So my question to you is that how successful do you think the care programs can be implemented without having the peer support for the providers in an institution? And do you see that as a requirement to get the buy-in from the medical staff to implement a process like that?
Personally, I think it has actually two roles. It's not just sensible and compassionate that we get our arms around and the caregiver and recognize that there is an emotional harm that's already occurred there and a whole complex set of emotions. But the other goal there is to actually reinforce for the caregivers. What you'll see later, we'll get into this a little bit more, but what this really is building a sense of accountability within the caregiver staff. This is no longer a lawyer looking at this later on and saying, I can defend it or I can't defend it with a paid expert. This is deeper and more fundamental than that. And by getting our arms around caregivers, we not only support them emotionally, but we collect information and we let them have a voice for really the first time in the deny and defend age, to let the caregivers have a voice in the direction that conversation should take. It honors what was earlier referred to as the sacred relationship between patient and caregiver, like deny and defend never did. Yes, another question?
I want to continue on this point. My name is Michelle David. This support, regardless of who's at fault, is so important. When I was a resident, a bad outcome happened, a patient died, and my attending, my chief resident, everybody said you were at fault. The only person who gave me support was the lawyer of the hospital when they read the case and said, I can defend this case, this resident did nothing wrong. And I can't tell you how devastated I was and how the rest of my residency was affected by just this system. Nobody even thought about it. They just wanted to have a scapegoat, and they scapegoated the resident.
That is one of the saddest parts of where we've come from, and we often hear that, I often hear that not only about doctors but nurses, that whole phrase, nursing eats their young. It's too bad, but we can be our harshest critics. I'm sorry for that. Any other comments, questions? Yes?
Would you have an opinion about staff attending the memorial service, for example, in this case of the baby who died?
Again, that's absolutely case dependent and relationship dependent. When we talk with patients, sometimes patients say to us, the last person in the world we want to see is the person who did this to our family. And then often it's the reverse. It can be very healing, but the patient's needs have to take priority in that situation. And that takes some subtle gauging in that communication. That's why early communication and empathetic communication is very important.
Yeah, it's a really good question.
I can answer that too. I have attended many of the memorial services, one just over a week ago, where in the service, the family representative thanked the staff of the medical center. And I've gone to them when there's been concerns about the outcome, would there be something going on? And many of them will always say, the fact that someone came meant you cared. So it may not be the doctor that delivered the baby, may not feel comfortable going yet, but usually somewhere in the nursing staff, they connect with someone. And I always feel like we sort of represent the hospital at that moment to say, we do care. And I have never had anyone so far say, I wish they didn't come. And a physician who might accompany me to go, scared to death when they first go, and then after say, I'm glad I went. First of all, because it meant something to that patient, but it also helps somewhat heal them too.
Hi, yes, I'm Sheila Giovannini. I'm a risk manager at a hospital. My prior job was as a medical malpractice defense attorney. So when I, hear about what are we telling the family, what do they understand, and adding that to the M&M process, I guess how do you sort of toe the line between keeping privileged information privileged and not disclosing too much, but also giving the family the answers that they need.
Oh, we could spend a day on that.
I don't really worry about it.
You're very intuitive. That is really an important divide to maintain, because we want the M&M process, we want those patient safety processes to be safe environments where people can say whatever they want to say. And we have had the mistake at Michigan, I don't know if I'd be happy to hear if you have, we have had the mistake where somebody came to a meeting and said, oh, the Department of Orthopedics Quality Committee has already concluded blah, blah, blah. And of course, the next thing they want are the expert reports, and they want to know who's on that committee and everything else. We had to work hard to say to ourselves, what does this patient deserve to know? And it's always the truth about their care. But how we got to our conclusions really is up to us. And that's not always an easy thing, but you're right on the money. And it can get pretty ugly, and you can start to open the door to processes that need to stay pretty safe. Just to give you a quick example, I got a phone call and an incident report one night from a respiratory therapist who thought she had seen a euthanasia. Can you imagine, first, how safe she felt to be able to say that, but how god-awful that would have been if she were right. And as you looked at as we pulled the facts together, we could clearly understand how a bystander could have thought that. But without the safety of that space, that could have been devastating and a complete mess. So yeah, we could talk a lot about how to manage that, because it will vary a little bit state by state, but that is absolutely an important thing to think about. Yes?
I'm not worried about it.
Yes, when you're, Bob Stiller, OBGYN. When you're evaluating an adverse event and you recognize or you realize that the patient's behavior contributed to it, let's say a poorly controlled diabetic, a patient who presented late for care, how do you counsel, when you're doing the explanations, how do you do it in a way so it doesn't seem like you're blaming the patient, but yet recognizing that their own morbidity contributed to an adverse outcome?
I think we would just do the communication like we would do any other communication without burdening the patient. Like, well, if you would have come for your appointment, this wouldn't have happened. We communicate honestly with the facts of the care, and then where we missed the care of the patient. It's not as much of a concern for me. I don't know what you would say.
It's not a concern for me either, because at that point in time when there's an adverse event, it's not exactly a teaching moment for the patient. So I discuss the things that we have control over, and we don't have control of the patient. By the time a case comes to my desk, I discuss the things that I know were done correctly, and if some things were done incorrectly, I'm open about it, and I let the patient know. The fact that their lifestyle or whatever contributed to it is not a part that I discuss, but the discussion that I have with the patient pretty much leaves it open that there's some ambiguity as to whether it was strictly the areas that we could have done better in, or if there was something else that contributed. And I say it in such a manner that that something else is open, and it allows the patient to possibly think, well, geez, maybe I shouldn't have smoked, or I shouldn't have drank, or whatever. I should have kept my appointments, or whatever it is in that patient's history. I only discuss the things that I know are correct and the things that I have control over.
So let me give you a little more lawyerly answer. Our obligation is to act reasonably under the circumstances, and, to borrow a tired phrase, we take our patient as we find them. So if it's an obese smoker who's set up for every medical complication, that can and is unabashedly part of the factual statement. But it rarely becomes part of the blame. Big difference. So to be able to say to a patient, yes, you had this big Whipple procedure, but you were diabetic and you were very obese and you were a smoker, and it set you up for every complication, and those things were discussed with you pre-op, and we've reviewed the care, and we really did the best we could, and the fact that you've had this infection or whatever afterwards isn't our fault, but here are the medical facts that played a role in why you didn't heal very well, or why you had problems with infection and those sorts of things. We don't shy away from that. But I would never sit down with somebody and say, you know, how dare you? You abuse your body, especially me. You abuse your body, you're overweight or this or that. We would never do it that way. So to the extent that that's part of the medical facts, we're unabashed about it. It has to come in as a factual part of the circumstances that we're dealing with. But I would never blame anyone. And Sue's point in this case about how quickly you could gravitate toward, I mean, under our fact situation, this mom may have asked, maybe through a miscommunication because she's not an American or a U.S. speaker, but maybe she did ask for a vaginal delivery. Maybe she did want to avoid a cesarean section, and maybe that did play a role in this situation. I can't imagine ever saying to her, this is really your fault because you injected that issue into this and caused the doctors to move down that road.
One more?
It's more a follow-up and a comment first to Dr. David's sad story about being the scapegoat in an unfortunate circumstance. If you have a just culture, which is essential basis for this kind of program, hopefully in short order that kind of behavior will be squelched, and certainly is nowhere does the blame and deny and the scapegoating is something that you move beyond in a care program. And the other comment about you have to educate people 3 years in advance. So it's critical to have just-in-time peer support for that kind of situation. And that peer support is to support the second victim, which is the provider as much as anything. And I think have everyone knowing, and I think one other thing that should be mentioned is at BI and most of these other institutions, behind their name badge is another badge, a green badge in the case of BI, that tells them what to do when something goes wrong right away. Here's the beeper number so you can get support, not half an hour or an hour from now in a crisis, but within minutes. And also the concept of having peer supports, and I think one of the greatest attributes of the program at BI, as I've heard about it, is it was a survey of the departments. Each department determined who would I want at my side if something goes wrong. And it may not be the chief, it may be a senior clinician, but it's someone who's going to have the respect and the wisdom to help a provider through a really onerous time. So I think having the just-in-time name badge that says this is the beeper you call, this is the number you call, whatever it is, so that you can get support, because it will have been 3 years ago or a year ago that you heard about this, is a critical piece. And then having someone who's responsive in a timely fashion and will support, as we heard in this process, all of the victims. And there's clearly in a situation like this a lot of people who are feeling guilty and afraid and alone, as the article that Sigal Bell wrote and Tom Del Banco so well articulates.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, panelists. We'll hear more from them in a minute. We're going to have a break now before we see the rest of the simulation. That we will be back here at 11:30. If you want to talk to anybody from MACRMI, you'll see these little red stickers on some people's name tags. Those are our members, so feel free to talk to them about these programs on your break. Thank you.